Welcome everybody. My name is Vicky Hanna and I'm going to be taking this unit for you. This unit is CHCPRP001. I'm going to be combining these slides, which are your underpinning knowledge, your key learnings to help you with your written and your practitioner skills. So this unit is about working in the community sector, us as workers to our clients, and then worker to worker, our peer, and then outwards to other referring agencies, people we need to maybe apply some wraparound supports for our clients, how we work collaboratively in that space when we're doing seamless referral pathways over. And then if we're working on a project, how we can bring those agencies together to perhaps identify some unmet needs or some gaps in services, and this will be your role. So for this particular unit, let's get started first of all with our acknowledgement to country. In this spirit of reconciliation, Ada Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land and our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing. And we move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And I extend this acknowledgement to all who may be watching this recording. So I'll break this down into 3 small sessions. The ideal way to study, of course, is to take those shorter breaks, get up and move around. So it's a lot of information to go through. This information is relevant to your written work and your practitioner skills, which is going to be done in recordings by you in a role play. So where you see an assessment that asks you to do a role play, that's going to be a recording and we will give you the scenario to be acting out. You'll do that with perhaps peers. You might do that with members of family or colleagues. And you can also book in with us at HADA to be able to perhaps facilitate that. When there's more than one person required, the instructions will be written into your assessment work. So in our very first part, by the end of this, we'll have an understanding of what's the difference between collaboration and networking and the different types of collaboration, the informal and the formal, and then what might be some networking opportunities and how can we reach out further to provide the best possible services for the clients that we're going to be working with. So what are the differences? In your learner's guide that you get with your resources, in chapter 1.1, it will outline what the difference is. Collaboration, however, is when we work with others. It's working together towards a common goal. So that might be the support that you provide your client, but it might be a project. One of your assessments in this unit, the CHCPRP001, does have a project in there. It can be on a large scale or small. It could be just a one-off or it could be long-term, working collaboratively together. It can be school-age care, it can be students, guardians of that young person, it could be families, it could be work teams and other organisations and services. Sometimes in the community sector, we might be working with someone under the age of 18. So the carer or parent or guardian of that young person, we collaborate with them We have effective collaborations where it needs to benefit all parties. So we have to take into consideration what might be the goals for our client and those people that we need to collaborate with. There's a short video here for you to be able to watch. It's going to come out with your written work as well in these slides in this recording, but it's actually going to be how to collaborate, the skills that you need to collaborate, that inclusiveness process. With networking, that's the difference here is it's about getting ideas and information and experience and combining them all together. The sharing of ideas and experience could mean the difference between an unmet need or filling a gap for our clients or our own role as well. It will benefit the individuals, but it's stronger together. So we often refer to this as the alliance circle, that wraparound that we have around the reason why we come together. And organisations gain from shared knowledge. So we can't be everything to everyone. So when we're networking, we might refer out if we've identified some goals with our client and you realise that where you're working or the services that you offer, you don't have that within the organisation, but you may have networked with other organisations and other workers. And that's what we do. We bring all of those services together to provide the best possible support for our client. So let's reflect on what might be some of those. So what does networking mean to you? When's the time that perhaps you've needed to bring in other people to be able to achieve something? And then what does collaboration mean to you? So in networking, we gather people. In collaboration, the people we gather start working on a common goal. So the types of collaboration could be partnerships, consortia. That's when you get more than one organisation come together. Auspicing, where one organisation sits over another smaller organisation or a group. So you might have gone for some funding. Let's just say you wanted to run an event and you need an organisation who has a legal entity to sit above that. So the organisation that sits above that becomes the auspicing agency. Usually when that happens, there is some funding involved, but a small group may not be able to get that funding unless they're auspiced under another organisation that meets the eligibility criterion for that. Sometimes it can be informal, where it's like mentoring is one-on-one. Auspicing is what another organisation or a body might do for another group. And then co-location, you might need a space to be able to set up and do your work, short-term or long-term. If it's longer term, we might set up a formal agreement and that'll be a satellite office. So say you're in one area and you wanted to branch out and fill some of those gaps to save people travelling, then you could have a satellite office. Sometimes that could be, you could be a visiting service provider and a support worker and travel into some of those areas. Places or public spaces like local libraries, they might have a notice board and say you will be there every Thursday and then come and meet and greet. So a co-location can be both informal and formal. And then the cooperatives. The cooperatives are a group that we bring together. It is still a legal entity, and all of these may need an informal agreement or a formal agreement. However, when you enter into an agreement as a community sector worker or a community organisation, there is a formality around that, because especially if you're working with funds, then you need to have a formal arrangement. There's a couple of different documents around that. We'll expand on that a little bit more. So a partnership is when two organisations or more come together, or two parties. It could be formally documented, an MOU, like a Memorandum of Understanding. And what it does is it outlines who's responsible for what, so that there's clarity around how that's going to work, and then what duties and obligations each of you have. So you've got a very clear understanding right from the beginning. This preparation and planning in a partnership just saves some confusion further down the line. And if you struggle, if there's something there that's come up as a barrier that perhaps nobody could see as you started to progress, this is something that has emerged, then you'll need these terms of references, and you'll circle back to that. You'll go, well, hold on, what do we agree on? Oh, we'll do it like this. And you need to be able to go to that. It'll form part of your reporting as well to your supervisor, your documents that you need to keep when you're doing partnerships, and then even perhaps your funding body, if you did receive funds, how you actually are going to be reporting on that as well. So auspicing is the partnering between two organisations, with one of them taking that lead. The lead organisation, as I said earlier, was the one that takes legal responsibility. It's usually an incorporated body. So that's someone who's a non-government organisation, an NGO, an association incorporate, and there's an act of legislation that sits around that, overseen by the Office of Fair Trading. So it is a business transaction. We do have overarching requirements, both our legal and ethical framework. So auspicing is a formal legal agreement. Sometimes there could be an idea of a project that you want to launch, and they'll auspice for a period of time. They may even help that smaller organisation become an entity in its own right and become an association, incorporation, or a charitable organisation. So it's like mentoring, but in the community sector. A co-location can mean that you are working in the same location. One of you would be the lead agency. It might mean that there's co-governance. You're making those formal decisions together. So a co-governance is when one or more of you create a term of reference to refer to and abide by for the period the agreement runs for. Short, we're going to do something for one-off event, or we're going to launch this as a pilot program and we'll review in 12 months. If we get funding again and we all decide that we'll go forward, then you will actually open that up and do the co-governance to include that in. Consortia with funding is most public funds to be efficient and effective. Funding bodies prefer to see people come together. An amalgamation is often forced to come together. You can't manage on your own, but you're stronger if you amalgamate with another agency. So you may absorb a smaller organisation, and that might be you find yourself in a role and you're working and it looks like they're going to lose their funding. Some of that due diligence around that and succession planning could be that you amalgamate with a bigger organisation. In the sector I work with, in a smaller organisation, though it covers a lot of services, it definitely punches above its weight, but it's also not funded, which means it runs on a social venture model. There's different types of funding. When you've got funding and you're answerable to the government, then that is taxpayers' dollars. And so we need to make sure that we have all of the framework around that. The government likes to report back to the public that every dollar that is spent is not caught up in administrative. So 2 or 3 smaller organisations trying to operate one organisation and they join forces. So a cooperative is when a group of organisations join together legally and then register, and yet able to retain their own identities and entity, their organisation separately. So I belong to a cooperative rather than an amalgamation. The cooperative I belong to is in one organisation, and it happens to have 11 small organisations underneath it. Quite unique, very successful, been happening for 10 years, and led by someone who's an amazing leader and manager. You'll start to discover who has either of those skills. So what they can do is they believe that getting a range of organisations in a cooperative gives them a footprint across a much larger area. So where we once might have only been covering a postcode, now we can cover 2 or 3 states or territories because we all sit in underneath, but the strength of that, and then we form an advisory group. And the ones that have been handpicked to be in a cooperative is because they specialise in different areas. So it might be youth, it might be mental health, might be aged care, disability, literacy, numeracy, housing and homelessness, First Nation, working in the prison systems. It's a big service that goes out, but each of those entities inside of that is overseen. So we're part of a hub. And we are all located in different areas and answer to one board as well. So that can happen, or you might have one of the bigger organisations and you might then work outwardly with memorandums of understanding in that. And then your lead agency model. So a lead agent would be, even though you might work with 2 or 3 other service providers because the client that you're working with needs more support, you may be the primary agent. And so with that, you lead all of the other services, you check in, you monitor, how are they going, you do the follow-up, but the client is yours. So that you are the primary service provider and you don't overwhelm the client. You facilitate all those other agencies and you manage that so that it feels safe, supported and supervised for our client to get the best possible service. So both things can happen. The micro, when we're working directly, a person-centered approach with our client, and the macro, where it's much bigger as well. And in the community service sector, depending in an area, if you're looking to have a career in this space, there are so many different roles that can be. Some are frontline, some are more administrative, but you need to have an understanding on how does the community sector work, the macro, the bigger picture, and then the smaller picture where we may sit inside that, that's the micro. So in a cooperative, it can often be the principles are self-help, self-responsibility, a democracy, everybody has equal rights. So equality, equity, and solidarity, which means we stay focused together on the one united thing that brought you all together. Really powerful, a cooperative, done well. If it hasn't got those agreements in place, if it hasn't got a strong board, if it doesn't have good communication feeding from each of those orgs up and then sharing information back out, but not interfering in the day-to-day operations of them, it still is at arm's length. It's a unique and can only really be successful if every organisation really knows their own service model, their purpose, their own values, their mission statement, and that it isn't about empire building. It's actually about strengthening the community so that we can reach more clients and better together is that space. So I work in something like that. I have seen that go very, very well, and I've also seen it go very badly. So let's have a look. Also, we need to explore, how do we get those networks as part of that? And then we'll have a look at what are the strengths and what are the deficits around working in each of those areas as well. So when we're reflecting on this, have a think about, where do you see yourself in the community sector? Have you ever accessed services? Have you ever been asked to go and speak to another agency or get referred over if you have ever accessed services and supports? But this is where the strength is. Networking is one of the most powerful soft skills that you can have in business and in the community sector. Who do we connect with? Unions, they are a voice for sector workers. Industry bodies, they are the lobbyists, the peak agencies who will often come back to the member base and then feed that up to the government of the day and say, this is what's happening out in the wider community, and they bring that back as a peak body. You may be part of an organisation that is a member to that. You can, as an individual, be a member, an associate member of some of them, but you might also be an organisation who holds the organisation membership, and then some of those memberships will give you a doorway into sitting on advisory groups or boards and advising or helping write a paper up to the government, so that you could make sure that your area that you live in and the clients that you work with are having a voice. So in that role, you may not sit in those peak bodies, but you are definitely an advocate for the people that you're representing as well. Communities of practice. So community of practice is that ongoing professional development, staying on focus. So if there's a change or a change in legislation, a community of practice, often referred to in the sector as a COP. Even in our team at HADA, we have COP sessions. So we have professional development, but a community of practices. How do we apply that in our day, our skills? What change does that mean when we're operating both as trainers and assessors? But every trainer and assessor with HADA is also a sector worker. And so if they teach AOD, they have that sector knowledge because they've worked in alcohol and other drug residential or day programs. They're involved in that space. If it's in the community service area, which this unit belongs to, they're working in the community service in an NGO or in a cooperative. They're part of a peak body as well. So we need to have that community of practice, is to make sure that we are learning to meet the needs and those trends as they change in the community. So in 2024, one of the areas where we're focusing on in our COP area, our community practice, is the lack of affordable housing. A lot of funding, the government are listening to that. Every area in Australia is experiencing shortage of access to supply. So that doesn't mean that there aren't vacant properties, but it's how do we access those where it is affordable? And the cost of living is putting that very first level in Maslow's hierarchy of need is shelter. And so we are experiencing that. That's an unmet need and gaps in services in the community service area. How do we network and find out what it's like for others, our peers? They might be in a different program. That's at an interagency meeting, often very informal. It's an incredible way to communicate. I live in regional Queensland, and we have a very strong interagency group, and it's overseen by our neighbourhood centre, which is like a community centre, a hub where lots of information can come in. Now, our neighbourhood centre can have every fortnight they have an interagency meeting, and there's at least 55 different service providers that turn up at those. So everybody gets a chance to just very quickly say, hi, I'm from this, we've got new funding, or we're ending, or I'm the new worker in this program. Or if I'm there, I might say, oh, we've got 3 vacancies coming up for young students, something like that. And they'll go, oh, I must catch that person before they go. How do we get hold of those people? Can you put me on your email tree? Very important in this space. And then we have our online communities, the ones, if you can't be there face to face, it might be part of being in an email tree where you get that information comes out, or a newsletter. Flagging that up. Our neighbourhood centre takes care of a lot of that. Even if there's a job vacancy that's hard to fill, they may not know that someone's either ready to move out of the role that they're in. We might want to have a career advancement, or if the program you're in, the funding is going to be ending soon because the contract might have been 1 year short term, or 2 or 3 years. And so it looks after those sector workers to help them then transition out of one or to another. A lot of headhunting goes on in those meetings as well, and floating it out. But it also means that you might know of somebody who's looking to move or relocate, someone coming into the area. So we do that to look after each other. It is quite informal, but a lot of business and community sector does still have a business model. A lot of business happens there as well. You might leave a business card. People still like to have an easy way to get hold of you, and the neighbourhood centre takes care of that in our online community and how we network there. It's very effective and successful. A union is a membership group. You pay fees, and in that, I like my union because it gives me practitioner skills, professional development ongoing for the sector. And it also lets you know about changes in your wages as well. It's got a direct link, workplace health and safety, and if there is any breach that's happening in the workplace, they are your advocate. But in Australia, it is not compulsory. Once there used to be a really strong you must join the union, or we're a union organisation. That has completely changed, and it hasn't been in place for 20 years. You might know there's a lot of places that do have union, and there's different groups that will be strong in that. I belong to my union because I want the professional development. However, I've never used a union for an employee type of matter. I can usually advocate on my own behalf, but I acknowledge that there are people who don't always feel strong in that space, and I know the work and the value for that. So you get free legal advice and things like that, just to know if you're on track. But it's not it doesn't mean the union will support you in anything like that. It will depend on the circumstances. So they stay across the awards. So a few years back, we had a Prime Minister in Australia, and her name was Julia Gillard. And a lot of the awards were state or territory. She brought them in under the national wage and brought all of those in. And then there might be enterprise bargaining, again, a formal agreement that sits around there. The enterprise bargaining agreement still has to be lodged legally with Fair Work, and that is how workers, community sector workers, are protected in that space. So everybody is protected. Every employee and volunteer has the same rights as a paid or unpaid person, and you can get that information from Fair Work. But it was very hard for sector workers if they moved from one state to another, if the award was different and the requirements. So when that Prime Minister brought everything together, it just got some coordination and some oversight and some great regulations put in place so that what you were able to do was work across one state or territory. It happens in a lot of trades, but the community sector lagged behind. So that was all fixed up back then, and there was fairness and equity. Stronger Together again, so having that one voice in the one award under it. So a lot of community sector workers are covered under the SHADS award, which is the Social Community Housing Disability Services, which is SCHADS is the award. But you can go to Fair Work Australia and have a look, or you might already belong to a union, but that would be, there's a few different unions. The one I belong to is the Australian Services Union. However, I want to let you know that for decades, I never belonged to one at all. So I just found it was very beneficial financially to do all my professional development at kind of like a one-stop shop. But people join those groups for different reasons as well. So your choice, absolutely never have to join a union to be able to have all that fairness and equity that you are able to be protected under the Human Rights Commission as well. Industry bodies are peak bodies. So they are membership groups. So your organisation might be a member, spoke about those. So I belong to some groups, our organisation does, and then I do personally as well as a professional, because it keeps that sector relevance in there for me. Some of those are fairly inexpensive, might be $5. Some of them are really quite expensive, and you've got a question for yourself, you know, like, do I actually get anything out of this, or can I go and get that information elsewhere? Some great resources out there for us as community sector workers. I encourage you to go to a website called Community Door. Amazing. And it's exactly how it's named. It's jump in there and it gives you a whole story around what it's like to be in the community services sector. Policies, procedures, where there's funding coming up as well. There's some other groups as well, like ethical jobs. So if you're going for a position and you want to get a role, it doesn't have all of them. It seems to be stronger in Victoria, but Hayter is our head office is in Victoria. So the ethical jobs is usually around community sector and non-government type jobs, non-government organisations. So it's just an industry body that gets together. So we have good opportunities to network. A lot of them are online. So that we're not isolated. I'm in rural, regional, and a lot happens in the cities. This builds bridges for us as workers, but you could be time poor, or you might be investigating working in the community sector. It's a great way to be able to find out what are some of those peak bodies. They have a strong voice with the government of the day, especially closer to election time, where people want people out there to be voting for them. Lots of promises are made around that, but peak bodies, industry bodies have influence in that space. So by being a member, they will come back to you and say, what's that like for you on the ground? So they provide industry best practice and keep that standard there for our clients, but mostly for us as workers in the sector. So communities of practice are very targeted with regular interaction. So we do that micro, Hayter, our training team, and then you get your macro, which is out in the wider community. So it's based on an understanding that the learning is very social, you know, so we all work in different states and territories. We're an online college, an RTO. We have blended, so we do classes in real time. We have recordings like this one. Everybody who's a student gets the recording as well. And then we need to be able to come together, if we can, from time to time to be able to discuss what's happening for us on the ground, and then what are we hearing from our communities, and then how do we feed that together, and then bringing our minds together to be able to share insight in different ways that we approach. As a worker, you will do that on a micro level for your clients, and that's what our networking and collaboration unit like this is about. So we do that with our peers. We do that up in our sector, where depending on where you're working, in youth or community services, alcohol and other drugs, mental health, disabilities, job agencies, they're all community sector work because our clients are getting a service and we deliver them. That's our role. So I spoke about interagency meetings. Ours is very dynamic, but we do that really well in our sector. There's incredible sector workers. It came out of a need because we're in a low socioeconomic area. We have quite a gap between the have and the have not, but we do community very well in our region as well. That can actually be both a positive and a negative. It can mean that because there's a lower disposable income, the Australian Bureau of Statistics will say that the average age, and when you do your project for this assessment, you'll need to know what's happening in your area. You know, what's the demographic? What's the average age? How many single parents are there? How many people with disabilities or people on NDIS? You need to know that information, because if you want to work in a community sector, they're potentially your clients. And so will the other workers be who you network with and collaborate with. So our online communities and networking, when you're doing your assessment for this, there's lots of different ways that we get information in and information out. Understanding the scope of the role, your limitations, and then joining with someone, even if it is just a referral, but otherwise we might formalise it more in that space as well. There's a video there for you to be able to watch on successful networking. So there's 2 short videos that will come with this recording as well, how to collaborate and how to network, because it is a skill. It's one of those soft skills to be able to do that. And it is something that strengthens your role as a worker, but also have a good understanding of how do we work together in the community service sector. So I'll pause here so that everyone can take a stretch and a break. Great. So we've had a brief break just to stretch, stay hydrated while you're studying. We can only take it in small bites. So this recording you'll be able to play back to help you with your studies and your assessment work. But part 2 of this part of a CHCPRP001 is at the end of this segment, we'll discuss and you'll have a better understanding around the legal and the ethical considerations. How do we formalise some of those partnering ideas, the collaboration that we were speaking about? And then what are the benefits and networking? I'm going to discuss also what might be the areas that can bring up a bit of a barrier to that as well. So it would be unrealistic to think that it's only ever amazing and positive. It isn't. And it can be the intention is really good, but it falls over for some reason. Part of your role play here, your practitioner skill, actually requires you to demonstrate this is going to come up. We'll give you a scenario, and then you need to be able to resolve that in a collaborative way, keeping in mind the reason that you all came together in the first place was to provide improved services for your clients. So we'll do a little more on that when we are at the very end of this unit, so that I can show you about the assessments, and I'll add that at the very end for you to guide you there. So the legal and the ethical considerations, we do due diligence in there. We need to have consideration of what that's like, what our obligations are, which roles we will fulfill. We jump into that space when we're working in the sector, but we are representing the organisation that we work for, not ourselves. So the reputational impression that you leave is how you conduct yourself in those interagency meetings, in the process when you're communicating with people. Yes, you are a worker inside that role. However, you are representing the organisation, and we need to know where our role stops and starts and when we may need to engage another service provider. If you start in the sector and you're not sure, that'll sit inside your policies and procedures. It'll also be inside your position description. And that's why we bring in the discussion around the framework or union. It's like, is that in my role? And is that in my pay grade? So you might hear the expression that's above my pay grade, so on a need-to-know basis. But it also means that you don't work in something that's outside the scope of your role. We don't deliver services that the organisation is not required to do. Even if you have that knowledge and skill, you must bring that back up to your line manager and your supervisor. I can't emphasize enough for you, this is for you, to protect you and to protect the reputation of the organisation, that you work within the scope of your role. You can put that into some of your written assessment work as well. And as you refer to your learner's guide, in this one, it's in chapter 1.4, and it talks about the importance to consider both the legal and ethical, and that you must be aware and follow your legal duties. So when you enter into an employment agreement, even as a volunteer, unpaid employment, you are required to only do the duties that your contract that you reached an agreement with said that you would do. And that's both ways. So you as a worker and also as your employer. Your employer cannot ask you to do anything outside of that role, outside of your pay grade, even if from time to time you might need to do a little bit extra, but not ongoing. And then you must check with your line manager and your supervisor if you report up to someone rather than your peer, someone who sits in the same space as you. That's more informal, where you share ideas. That's where a community of practice goes to. However, if you've got someone in your organisational chart that you report up to, then you must go to them. Even if it's a check-in and they go, oh, no, that's fine, you don't have to tell me. As a matter of professional conduct, you must always. And then because we keep a diary or a reflection journal as a sector worker, as part of our well-being, then you diarise everything. You write down, on this date, I spoke to my line manager. On this date, I did some professional development. On this date, I was working with my peers, and we decided that we would all join another group or go and do some professional development. At HADA, all of the team have access to professional development through the membership that HADA have. And so we all benefit as staff members by being part of that, and HADA make sure that they provide that for us. So we're still in that same relationship as trainers and assessors. We have our own corporate community being part of the HADA bigger team as well. So our role is as trainers and assessors, but they're our professional relationships. So it's everywhere that we are, as an employee, as a sector worker, and when we're working with our clients, how we can do that really well. And it benefits to do a better service and look after ourselves. So in the online networking etiquette and policies, that was that reputational damage I was speaking about. Look, it's vital to maintain professional standards. Your reputation will be everything for you. If you move from one role and then you go and work for a different organisation, oftentimes you'll have the same clients and you go, oh, I've met you before. Yep, I'm now working in this. Very common in smaller places. I don't know where you sit, but who oversees this is there is no title there in the middle. This is something that we drive ourselves. So we've got online networks can make or break a career. So a professional platform for workers could be LinkedIn. Somewhere where it has some sector credibility. So go in and open up a page on LinkedIn. You get to list, other people will headhunt from there as well. But that's a really important space. So we encourage some of our clients to be really mindful of their social media because if they are being I guess, investigated by a group maybe like child safety or even the police, that can actually end up being evidence, and it does get raised in certain areas that you might not want it to be raised. So put your private life and your personal life on a private setting, and then use a professional setting like LinkedIn or somewhere something similar. That's a platform that a lot of professionals will use, but there's also, I like it for another reason, because it's got great community of practice in there, and we network and collaborate in those spaces depending on the areas that we have an interest, or perhaps you might use that to learn more about a sector if you want to go into it. But there's so many different branches, so many different services. Community services is a foundation. It's the very first door I came through with my studies. And then you branch off into perhaps specialty areas of expertise where your interest lies when you're studying. It's a great foundation unit, this one, and it is such a strong unit that it sits across as a core unit on 6 other qualifications in the community scope. So PRP001 or CHC, which is all the community ones, BSB are all the business. So CHC PRP001 is a core unit. So very valuable, this one, because it affects every area, no matter what specialty you'd like to go into. So how do we conduct ourselves when we're in that macro out there, our social networking and our online and our etiquette, and then representing ourselves and our organisation? And then how do we do that in a micro, in a smaller space where we network worker to worker or peer? We may refer to that. So a peer support worker is someone who may have a lived experience and works in that space. And then it might also be peer-to-peer, the people that are in the organisation that you're volunteering with or working with as well. And we call that peer review. That means we've put it out there and our colleagues will review that for us. And we can do that both formally and informally as well. So it's very powerful. I strongly encourage you to do that in that area, because those networkings, every time we go to one of those meetings, we're always being interviewed about whether we would be good to collaborate or partner with or do a referral with our clients so that we can provide a better service. So maintaining your client's privacy and confidentiality and your own. So follow your workplace policies and procedures. Keep in mind that you must stick to the Privacy Act, which is the 1988, and now that applies different in states and territories. So when you're researching for assessments, if you want to talk about what that is, know whether you've got different ones in your state or territory. And then there's the Commonwealth one, which also covers the Terrorist Act as well. So I take privacy and confidentiality very seriously, so much so that I won't even have sharing of that in our classes. somebody's email that would go off a recording if we were in a live class. How can we do that? We need to manage that safely. It's little things like you might be sending an email out to 2 or 3 other people that you decide to network and collaborate with, but you must put them on BCC, and BCC is a blind email. So that means that nobody is getting anybody else's address, and you're keeping that private and confidential. It is up to the person themselves to decide if they're going to share it, or if we're doing a referral with our client, we need to do a referral with their consent, and they will know exactly what it is that we're referring, who we're referring them to, why we're referring them, and for how long that referral will last. So often a referral might be just a one-off, short term, that's it, and then come back and review. I like to think of that as having a sunset clause. When we first do a meet and greet with our client, we must let them know that everything that they say to us is private and confidential. So I won't even share, if I'm in the sector, I won't share with one of my team. I might work in the housing and homeless sector in one of the areas, and I will say room 2 rather than say the person's name. I'll refer to that as in my reports as rooms 1 to 7 or 1 to 11, depending on which property or residential program we're referring to. But we talk about location only internally, but we would not disclose an address of anybody. That would be for the client themselves. So it's across everything that we do. You will have access to a simulated workplace platform with your studies with us. It's called First Access, and First Access is very similar to just about every organisation, even the government ones where I've got to enter data in there, and you get authority to be able to log into the government sites and have access to members of the public private information, but you have to have a clearance to be able to do that. For a lot of places, it's a working with children check or a suitability under NDIS, yellow card. There's a few other areas that we need to be part of and keep our regulation requirement to be a fit and proper person to work with vulnerable members of the community. So when we come to this, we don't disclose any of our clients' names. Our written might be, I'm working with a 17-year-old male. That's it. That's all the information somebody needs, if at all. Oftentimes we'll say a client I'm working with. We don't even have ownership over that. We wouldn't say my client or your client. We would say I'm currently working with a client in this program, and they're looking for some extra supports. And I understand that your organisation does that. I'm wondering, could we chat about how you take your referrals, and then I'll take that back to the client. So that's how we apply that is the procedure. The policy is usually what we must meet as our benchmark, and that's usually the law. You can be fined or breached. If it's intentional, it's a criminal matter if you breach it. If it is unintentional, but you didn't follow the policies and procedures, then it's a civil matter, and it can ruin the reputation of an organisation. So best practice is that you do this from the beginning and you embrace and develop that higher standard of care. Then it just becomes natural for you. You never have to think, gosh, you know, that was a slip, because you will set a high benchmark for yourself each and every time. Clients will not work with us if they think that they cannot trust us. And so this is how they know. When we say everything you say to me is private and confidential, and that the only time that I would ever share anything is if you were at risk to yourself or to others, or someone was threatening to harm you, I would need to refer that up to my line manager. And that would be our policy and procedure. And I would follow that. It would be in my file notes, and I would let somebody else know. That's our duty of care to ourselves to our clients and to the organisation's reputation. So how do we maintain that? Name, address, contact details, all private and confidential. Parent, guardian, or next of kin, even if somebody says, oh, look, I just wanted to find out, I believe my son is staying in your property. You cannot do that. You cannot do that at all unless they have authority. The client has given authority for that. So no other service provider can call you up and say, oh, look, I understand you've got so-and-so there. Just like, I'm not sure, how can I help you? Just bring them back onto what's the purpose of their call. It can get a little uncomfortable, but how do you maintain those professional boundaries? By really using some motivational, intentional questions. What was it you were hoping to be able to get supported with? And if they say, I need to get a message to them, say, well, if they are, I just can't, I can't confirm that. What would be the message if I did? So if the client has given us consent, and that is that named person, then we can pass a message on and the client can call them back rather than us do that. If you have a referral, though, your referral will be consent to release, obtain, and store that private information as much as the client chooses to. We say that in the beginning of our intake and assessment to make certain that our client knows each and every time they have dignity of risk to not disclose certain information to us. If we are a mandatory reporter, then we are required to report to our line manager if we think that there is something where there is harm to self or others, or they have shared something around that. And we must report that up to our line manager, whatever our policies and procedures say. We will store information like age and date of birth, the gender that's identified by our client, if that's relevant and they choose to, and then any additional needs that they might have, any reasonable adjustments. That might be access. That might mean maybe they need an interpreter there as well. Maybe they're survivors of domestic family violence. Those additional needs is, I don't want my name to be written on any documents. I want to be given a client ID number. So we can do all of that and maintain the privacy and confidentiality. If we've got information that we don't want other people to read in the organisation, we can put that into another area under files and head that with sensitive information only, and then who has the scope to be able to open that would be another sector worker that you are doing case conferencing with and sharing that file. Perhaps if you were going, if I was going away on holidays and I wanted somebody to look after my clients while I was away, or my caseload, I mean, not my clients, I would need to make sure that I did some some handover, some sharing of information that's relevant for them to have full information. So my client file notes will be based on fact, progressive. On this date, I spoke to them, that was face-to-face, this was a phone call, that was a text message, I sent out information about something coming up that they might be interested in. That is the appropriate and within the scope of our role. What information do we share? Here's another video there on the privacy laws of Australia. Very important for you to be familiar with those. So a breach is often a fine, and it can and will go to court if the client complains. You will have a complaint process internally. Now, the complaint can't be vexatious, so it'll get investigated internally. It could be your client's interpretation of what has happened, but it will be followed up and investigated. Know that the client absolutely has the right to do that corrective feedback and make a complaint. And then you, as a worker, also absolutely have the right to be able to refer back to your notes and give your version of events. So that's your right in the workplace as well. So I encourage you to keep good progressive factual file notes if you're working in the sector, and get into those best practices around here. We cannot possibly rely on our memory for everything. So diarising is one of those tools of the trade that are very important. But when you diarise, de-identify. So a client initials only, and store that other information, privacy, confidentiality areas, in a sealed area where it's protected and stored, so that not everybody has access to that, because then the client will understand that you follow that procedure and they can trust you, and you consistently do that, and they believe you, so that nothing about me without me for the client is part of the practice that you follow in the community sector. Very important, extremely important when you're in a small town, if your area, but it's a small planet. You can think that you wouldn't bump into somebody in if you move somewhere, and amazingly, we can bump into somebody that we know. So we do need to be very mindful. The thing is, if in doubt, never do. Even the first name and a story, that can identify somebody. Some things may be out in the public arena, but it's not our role ever as a worker to share that information. It must be safe, supported, and supervised in that space when we share. So the intellectual property and copyright covers all of the print material. So copyright, HADA have a good understanding around all of that, and have a very high benchmark across all of this. Your information is private and confidential and stored the same way. Our copyright, so we convert our recordings into YouTube, and we do not show a recording of a video when we are recording ourselves. If we've got a live class, that comes out as separate. So it's in our practice. It's our consistent best practice standards that we follow in HADA, because we teach in the community service. We must apply that back into our role here as an RTO, a registered training organisation. Because storing of your private and confidential information is extremely important as well. And we have so many different departments that who will hear that information, and have you given consent for that information to be shared with other people who work in the organisation? So it's a protocol, a procedure, and that means it's the action that we take. And we practice that across every area in HADA, and as a sector worker across every area. So when we talk about those interagency meetings and we're speaking to people, we're very mindful that we don't do that anywhere else. That goes with us wherever we go, and that is the reputation of the organisation that we're working for. But it's also your reputation, where someone could, even if you weren't there, say, I absolutely know that sector worker has a very high standard in professional conduct. And you will set that standard high for yourself. That will build your reputation of being a consistent professional, where no matter what, your name and reputation means absolutely everything. It's a foundation you build an amazing career on. And I encourage you to view this in how that affects you, and then how it affects our clients, and then that bigger picture of how does that impact the organisation that you work for and our wider community as well. Okay, let's now have a look at copyright. I'll explain to you a little bit about, can we use other people's material? We send it separately, but things are covered under the Copyright Act, and any of those variations to it, the upgrades and changing of language. In 1968, social media wasn't out there. Radio was the way to go. Television was only a decade old, plus one here, 1957. And then, they've had to change the laws around protecting things. Music, if you play it, computer programs, films, sound recordings. Permission to use must be obtained. So in one of the roles that I have, we wanted to play a song. We went to that band and we said to them, we wanted to use their song, and we got permission. So we follow that legal, ethical practice. It's something that is very much a part of the community sector. So before sharing any documents, check the status. Is this intellectual property where it's owned only by that organisation as well? And can I share that elsewhere? Is this the approved document? So when you're working here in your assessments on this unit, we will give you access in the First Access platform. It'll say, go in there and we'll give you a link on use the individual support plan for the client. And that's your internal intellectual property and client file. And then it might say, use the consent form and the referral form. Now that means it's a controlled document, and that's the one that you do it on rather than make up your own document. It's great because it means that it will cross every area. So for instance, let's just look at this picture in front of us here. We have an educating company which provides resources which meet that Australian quality framework accredited standard. This organisation here have their logo, so that means it's their intellectual property, and we make sure as an RTO, like all our other RTOs, that we have permission to use that because we pay to use that, so that we've got the standard to make sure that everyone learning with us is meeting that requirement, and your assessment tools meet the standards of practice. Now, they would need to upgrade that. If there's something they haven't, then we may need to fill those gaps and let our learners know. Or it might be that we can put our logo in those spaces as well. So you might see some of your material which will have Hayter Institute of Education, because we will have the right to, under our agreement, to be able to do that. So if someone asks you to do something in the organisation you're in, you need to make sure that, one, it's in the scope of your role and you've got permission to do that. Best person to ask is your line manager, and then go into your portal with your internal, like First Access, which is a kind of simulated workplace resource station, and you will use the documents that they tell you which are the style guides to follow, and you don't vary them and change them, because that is what they've got approval over, and that's the same for you as well. Intellectual property can get a little tricky. So under the Patents Act 1990, it covers things that are invented or trademarks. It's a clear understanding of what belongs to whom within a collaboration. So when you might be doing, say, a project and you're working with different organisations, which bits are theirs and which bits are yours? In this assessment, you work for First Access. You'll take on the role of a support worker and different roles in your assessments, and you will be working there. So you're answerable to First Access. So that's why we give you access to that, so that you go in and it's a staff login as if you're a worker there. When we ask you to demonstrate your written work and your knowledge in a role play, a recording, then you simulate the background. So I've got a simulated background here. You can see that that's a Hayter Institute of Education background. That says I'm working for this moment of time for Hayter. So if you're doing something and it says, you're holding a meeting, you're bringing in all these stakeholders who you're going to do referrals with, then you'll find a virtual background if you're recording, and you will dress accordingly. You will turn up for that role play as if you were going to work. You will set the scene for that role play like it's a simulated workplace environment. It might be you and just one client, so you'll find a room that has 2 chairs and it looks appropriate. if you can't do that, and that's a bit too tech savvy for you, then you might blur your background and just make sure that everything is private and confidential, that no other people are in your role play unless they're playing the client specifically. But then you're going to have to describe the room. I'm at work and the simulated workplace environment, I'm in a common area, and then we're in boardroom meeting number 1, and there's a desk and there's 6 chairs and there's 4 of us that are going to be attending this meeting today. You have to state what it would look like so that we can assess you as you do understand and you have just demonstrated that. And when we're marking your assessment, then our observation checklist includes all of that they introduce the unit. My name is, and I'm going to do CHCPRP001, and I'm meeting today with other agencies, and we're talking about a shared client. More on that when we get to our assessments at the very end, and we're moving towards that space now. But that intellectual property, all of that, you'll see and only use those documents with the First Access site. So there's the knowledge, and then there's how you apply that in a skills area. So 50% of your assessments are your written knowledge questions, and another 50% of that, the weight, sits around your skills and ability to be able to duplicate that in a simulated workplace environment. Okay. So the benefits is that we reach out to other organisations when we're collaborating and networking. I call that wraparound services, which means that we will form an alliance around the person in the middle of that circle is the client. That's a client-centred approach. The most important person that we're all coming together for is the client and deliver those services. It will add extra services and expertise. So it might be we need housing and we need employment help, career planning, and we might need mental health counselling. And then you might be a community support worker, a generalist in that role, and then you'll need these specialists. You're not required to be everything to everyone. In fact, it's a really unhealthy professional boundary for us as workers to have a client that's reliant or codependent on us in that space. So think about ownership and then think, how am I helping that client to become more resilient and agile? If I do that by showing them who they can go to in the sector around them in their community, then they will take ownership over that when they feel strong enough to be able to do that. Or they might be able to do that and they are just coming to you for some information and advice, but you may take it a step further and do the referral. But it can absolutely reduce costs, but it's great if we have that wraparound support, because then the client doesn't feel like they've got to repeat their story to another person and then another person. That we're working collaboratively with others to make a much better case plan for our clients. So they are the person in the middle. Everything, all our thinking and planning and decision making is around how can we best help that client based on what the client said their own goals were. There's a person-centered approach video there, which unpacks for you. So I can't speed through that because of the privacy and confidentiality. I can't record it because it's a breach of the Copyright Act, but it comes to you with your resources separately. I'm mindful of it. My practice around that is to not let that recording come up into our space, but to make sure that I separate that and I do that separately. It's across everything that we do. So the benefit for our client and the family is that it's accessing where they may not know who to go to. You will be the lead agent. You'll be the lead worker, and you will facilitate all of this for your client if they came to you and then you're referring out. But your client doesn't want to lose you or feel as if you're handing them over to somebody else. I'll go into that, you being the lead agent and making sure that you monitor and manage that, and that the client is comfortable with that referral. If they go, look, I just didn't click with them, it's client-centered then, means that it must benefit the client and the family. This isn't, oh, we think we've got a more of an idea about what you need. That is not what client-centered work is. So the benefit is being able to offer more services to our clients, more skills, especially if you're level entry and you want to bring in other people. But not only that, you can absolutely burn out in the community sector, because you can have a lot of clients who have very high and complex needs. And so we need to look after ourselves. This is one way to look after ourselves, is to make sure that we work collaboratively with others and try not to be and do everything for our clients in that space. So having a greater capacity to achieve the goals that our clients are looking for as well. So it encourages our organisations to be responsive rather than a long wait around. If we work in a consortia or a partnership or case conferencing, then it isn't a delay of 6 to 8 weeks or even months to be able to access those services. If they go on that wait list, you might already have that, and you can bring a lot of those conversations together and put that there for your clients. It's a great way to be able to have your clients supported, and you can work on that conferencing and share only the information, and others might go, oh, look, we've got capacity to take another client, or this organisation, I heard that they do. So we network and collaborate in that space. Okay, we'll take a short break here, as we should. Have a stretch. We've been talking for a little while. We're right up to our final part of the theory side, the underpinning knowledge, the key learnings. And then I'll take you over into the assessment space as well and show you what it is that we're going to assess you on. And of course, all these resources, as you go into your student portal, you will start in your assessment space there. And our induction has outlined for you what supports are available to you, your resources in your learner's guide, and then of course our learner support officers who you can contact, and then how you can get access to trainers and assessors in that space if you need to, in a study session in a small group. Okay, let's take a short break here and we'll come back to this space. Welcome back. Just a brief stretch. Stay hydrated. Okay, so be kind to yourself while you're studying. Play this back in short, brief bursts for yourself to be able to retain some of that information. You've got the slides, they're part of your resources, but bringing the slides to life and how we apply that in our sector work, as your interest is sitting around community services, this will cover every other study that we do, regardless of the work that we do. How we collaborate and network is a really important professional and soft skill as well. Talks to how we communicate with ourselves and with other people as well. So in part 3, as we're wrapping up this unit for you, we'll cover a little bit more about what are some of the setbacks and deficits around collaboration and networking, and how and when do we collaborate together? When do we know we actually need somebody else to be in that space? It can be quite overwhelming for people as they begin in the sector, or who are already working in the sector, and you realise that we're supposed to know everything, and or think we're supposed to, but we don't. We just need to know how to find somebody who can help. And it's perfectly okay to say to a client, look, I'm not sure who's available locally, but let me find out for you. But if you're going to interagency meetings and you're talking collaboratively with others, you can say, look, I did come across a new service locally, and I'll find out a little bit more information. You might gather brochures and be able to share that with someone and say, look, we picked up some different support services around town, and they've given us some of their brochures for our clients, and this could be something. So you're helping your client. It doesn't always mean that it's on a phone call or a referral out. Your client might have capacity to do this for themselves, and all they needed from you was how to get that information. So please be kind to yourself when you're in the sector. You don't have to be everything to everybody. Just need to be able to model that behavior for your clients and say, well, let's find out together what's available, because it could be a service that does offer support, but for whatever reason they are no longer operating, or they're short-staffed, or the delay could be there. So we are their support person in that space, and continually make sure that we provide support for them to find and access those services. So the drawback can be, gosh, who's going to take full control? Who leads? You can have a lot of leaders in one space and not a lot of doers. Different working styles. You might click with some personalities and not others. You might have one service provider that's very responsive, a frontline role, or you might have one where they've got to get permission and authority, and that could take a week before you hear back. So it can be just different working styles as well. There's an expression, too many cooks. That means everybody's in the kitchen all at the same time. Kind of, it gets a bit chaotic if you could reflect on what that might be like. And then, of course, conflict, where you can butt heads, or you don't agree, or you're strongly advocating for a client because someone is not going to deliver the service that you know that they're there to deliver. And that could be more about the worker rather than about the service provider. So we don't know yet whether we've got that collaboration. It takes time. We go through stages of building that, going through the storming of a team, and then the forming of it, to make sure that we're all on the same page and got the same idea and the same goal to help our client. And then we can move into the norming, who's going to lead and how are we going to do this and who's responsible for what. And then we do our performing, which is great. And then how do we end that? What's the adjournment, the ending of the time that we're together? Because it may only be a very short period of time we're working together in that space. So let's unpack that just a little bit more. So who leads in the collaboration? Who's got oversight over it? You can have tension, unclear responsibilities, boundaries that we're working to, and then also agreement. So collaboration has a structure. Networking is more informal. So how do we work together and document that? So if we're having meetings, we keep minutes, file notes around those as well. So we have different working styles and challenges. You can have some personality clashes in that space. If something is unclear, that's usually where there's just misunderstanding. If you think win-win, the other people win and you win, how can we work together? We must never lose sight of our purpose. Why are we together, working together? And that is for the benefit of the client and the community, the client being our micro, and then the community being our macro, our wider obligation as a community sector worker as well. So we need to have a strong leader who can kind of navigate that space. Often that we have that in our line managers and our senior management and our CEOs. I shared with you at the beginning how we had a consortia and a cooperative and an incredible CEO in that space who looked after who does look after all those 11 organisations and has done for more than 10 years. Now, it started with 3 and it grew to 11. And that is, if you say it fast, it sounds easy, but it absolutely is not. And I acknowledge anyone who is really good in that space and ethical and has a great understanding. There is no ego in that space for that to work. When you are collaborating, it is not a competition with each other. It is definitely a cooperative space. That's what collaboration is. We're working together for a much better outcome. So the personality stuff has to be parked at the door. However, it takes a little bit to get that out of that storming and then into the forming and then performing what is normal and that rhythm. A great group is one where there's that mutual respect and professional conduct, best practice, a clear guideline. We agreed it would look like this, and our terms of reference, how we're going to report, when we're going to report, who's going to do what. And then that way you go, oh, this is great. I only have to do the thing that I do, but the client is going to get so much more because we're collaborating together in that space, rather than seeing it as complex and everything the client needs. By working together, you do your bit, and then the other people, that's their area of expertise, and they do their bit, and the client gets amazing wraparound supports. If we do this really well, it makes you a great worker. There's a lot of satisfaction in that. It's terrific for your professional development and your personal development and your reputation, and it's great for the organisation. But ultimately, it is there for our clients as well. So who leads it? We covered that as well. We definitely need to have a leader. An agreement gets reached. So too many cooks is what usually happens when you have a room full of leaders. Like you can't get anyone to agree. Consensus means that we've all agreed to do this one thing, and it can really slow it down. Who does that impact? Us, because you turn up and you go, oh, we never get anywhere in this meeting together, and we're supposed to be helping the client, and we keep missing our target. But it's hard to get everyone to agree together. You might do that with a show of hands, but if you've got clear professional boundaries and guidelines of who does what responsibility, and you come in with that intention to make it go well, it will. And so delays caused by needing to check, it might be, well, I don't have authority, I've got to take that back to my line manager. That can happen as well. And then agree on levels of autonomy. I don't need to know everything about it. So when I do a referral, or if I get a referral from somebody else, I don't need the whole client story. That's entirely up to the client to decide how much. If they are just looking for someone to go and be their court support person, I might need to have some information, but I don't need to know all of that. What would legal aid share with me? What might a domestic family violence service share with me if it's a victim survivor? It's entirely up to the client because it's their story. I just need to know what service they need from me, what day I need to provide that service, how long I might need that service to deliver, and then is that within the scope of my role, or is that something that I need to say, look, that's outside of what I do, but I actually can refer you to somebody else, or I can bring them into this space and collaborate. So I'll often have, like, in my role outside, I might have legal aid call me, or the police might call me, or child safety might call me, or one of the other agencies, and say, look, this person needs someone in court with them. Or it might come from members of the community who can access that as well. So we just need to know what your role is, what you're supposed to do. So I know where my role stops and starts, and I know where other people's role stops and starts. And so we have that professional conduct, that scope that we work to, and those boundaries. And the more you work with people, or the more you do this practice, you'll find that it really is a much better service out there. But you also need to remember that you're going to work with these people ongoing, if you are in the sector and want to be, that you can't have that conflict get in the way of it, because you're going to need to work with them again. And in this one moment of time, you can still have a robust conversation and put that boundary in and say, look, that's as far as I can go with that. And then approach that in a way, how can I still work and provide and contribute in a meaningful way, but not feel that you're pressured or coerced or bullied into doing something, or feel obligated. We can often have an overwhelming sense of responsibility to think that we are the person that needs to fix it, or perhaps we're the only person, depending on how that is. You will burn out very quickly if you don't work within the scope of your role. You may struggle with your line manager and your reporting if you work outside of that as well. You need to check in and be very clear, know your role and your boundaries, and don't overstep those as well. Very important to have that professional conduct. The only reason that we are even working with that client is because of the organisation that we're representing. So we must always have that there. It's not about the client or the organisation. These things belong together. As a professional, we coordinate and facilitate those relationships, both with our client, out into the wider community, and with our other sector workers, always at the forefront of who we're working for. So the conflict potential causes lots of things. So might have a position on a particular topic, changes in group dynamics or the role, someone leaves and a different worker comes in and it's not flowing because you've got to do all the storming and forming again, even though you might be an existing group. That's even like that if we're attending other things that we belong to. If you reflect on that and think about what was a time that you were brand new to a group and you're joining it until it became part of your normal. And then how are we as a worker? Do we open that circle and allow other people in to that space? Do we welcome them? Do we acknowledge that? Do we reflect on how that might feel for us if we were that person? Then we need to reflect, what is this like for our client, and does the client feel that it's safe, or that they can trust you, that you're not sharing some of that really private information, that you'd had that conversation, that you weren't going to discuss it with them, that when they go and see this other service provider and get that expertise, that the other service provider says, look, you've been referred to me for career planning to get work, and it says that you've discussed some things that you're interested in, but I'd like us to be able to do that. So I've got the referral. It says you're very interested in hospitality. Well, we actually have some really great opportunities that we can work with. We can have partners in the community who take volunteers, if you would like to try that beforehand, and we've got training orgs that deliver some barista training and table service, and we can get you into that space. So they're the experts that they've been referred to, but the other conversations that they've had with you, the clients had with you, that's private, that's not known to this person, because the only reason that you've been referred to them is for career planning. And so there is a sense of safety, knowing that the other things are not information, and they don't need it anyway to do career planning. But if there's another layer in there, then that's your work. You do that as a support worker. excuse me, sorry. Okay, there's a video for you to watch there, for us to watch. So I spoke a little bit about our stages of team development, our forming, our storming, that's the conflict space we just covered. The norming, like, okay, we're part of a group, we're working out, okay, we know who does what and who doesn't do that, and then let's get on with it and perform. And then we've come to the end of that. That's the adjourning, that's close the door as well. So it's important to have an understanding that the relationship has a bigger objective when we come together in that space, and then we repeat that. The more you do with the same people, the easier it is to get to the performing stage. The norming is kind of catch up, but you're building on something bigger, and those referral pathways, they then become seamless referral pathways for us, a great understanding and working collaboratively together, not just for that client, but every future client as well. So when and how you need to do some research when you're talking with your client, you want to be able to unpack what their goals are. In the assessment around this, it's you're going to need to go through a role play and work with one client. We give you a story around, and we'll put that into an example for you. And then you're going to, in that role play, discover through your intentional interviewing questions, you're going to discover what are 3 goals. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. That'll be in your learner's guide in chapter 2, part 3. So the resources are here in your slide, and then in your learner's guide, you can refer there as well. Go to there, and then I'll share with you what your assessment looks like in that space. Setting our ground rules, our terms of reference, understanding the scope of our role and the scope of this group that we're forming together. How are we going to work together? We're going to meet once a week. We're going to make sure that we share information that's helpful for the other person, and not share some information that is not relevant and we do not have consent to share. So we set timelines on, we'll have that done within 7 days, and delegate those roles out as well. So best practice, I've spoken about how we document information, having a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, or another type of contract, and an agreement, and then document is used to set the ground rules for the partnership. That's our terms of reference. We can also work with something that's a little less formal, declaration of intent that just says we intend to. But when we're collaborating and we're talking about a client, we would have an MOU in place. You'll be asked to refer to what those formal agreements might be in that scenario. In some cases, we're doing referrals, but when we come together and collaborate, we need to formalize that in some way, put that in writing, so everybody's got an understanding of the actual guidelines. So a collaborative document, memorandum of understanding, or a declaration of intent, and a term of reference, which will cover all of the areas, like which documents. We use our own documents, or no, we're going to design a document for this collaborative partnership that we're building. We've all got to take it back to our line managers to make sure and we've got consent. So you're setting the ground rules there about that. You can collaborate and network without having a formal document, but you must keep minutes of the meeting. So you've got a record of it so that everybody is in that space, and then someone facilitates that as well. And then review. How's it going? Is it working really well or not? Are we seeing some people move out of that space because that part of that work is now completed? The client might only be able to access that 6 times. And then that will be the end of that. But we need to share all of that information in. If they can't be at the meeting, they they have completed that, and we've got an update from it because we used another method to communicate. So include any of those strategies when you're planning, and then what are the shared goals, and then making sure that we're checking, are we on track? Or have we gone off track, and do we need to bring it back into what we originally came here for? So when we're reviewing or renewing a partnership, you need to ask yourself these reflective questions. You might discuss it as a group, though, like, how are we going? Are we achieving our objectives? Wraparound support services for our client, that could be the objective. It could be that you want to start a new service and you want to work together more regularly. So what has gone well, and what is something that we could do differently? Getting that feedback so we can have that continuous improvement. And do all the partnerships still have shared aims, or have they now moved on to another area because their work has been completed? Or maybe they've had a change in funding and they can no longer provide that service, or maybe they are short-staffed and what they originally said they could do, they no longer can. And so that changes what they said. But that could also create an opening in review where you go, okay, well, we can pick up some of that work. Where are you finding it the hardest at the moment? Would be how we would approach it. Well, we can actually take some of that burden. It'd be this area that you have expertise in, that we're really after. How would that sound? And so you're collaborating, and it's like, yeah, that'd be great. So they can stay in there, that partnership and that collaboration, but you're aware that they have a need. This is how we work better together in that space. Try and come up with strategies that are solution focused, and that intention, because it really will help your client as well. Your client might give feedback that it isn't really working, or they haven't been in touch. But when you come together in this space, this is helping to understand what is going on. We apply the same approach as what we do with our clients. If we go to a doctor and we tell them what's happening and they ask motivational interviewing questions to find out symptoms, and then they write a script, we walk out of that surgery and we don't have to fill that script. We're just doing that because we trust that person, or we feel as if we have got collaboration and there's consent, and I'm part of the decision-making process. We apply that same approach here when we're collaborating, and also with our clients. That's what person-centered is. That is their decision to make, self-determination there. When we come in here, we need to have that cooperative mindset as well. And so we need to find out, are these unintentional things that come up, and then how are we as a support person, if we say we're a support worker, then we support our peers in this space who work in the sector as well. We make recommendations. Does it still need to meet, or could we not meet as often? Now that we've got a kind of a flow, we're in that norming and performing, and we only come back together. We might decide that we'll have a meeting once a month, or the client might have exited the services and the case conferencing no longer needs to take place. And are there any recommendations that those discoveries that we could take and improve it if we find ourselves back in that space again for another client? Or you might go, well, if this has worked so well, and we're getting our community of practice, our COP as peers, I think it'd be great if we could do some case conferencing from time to time, and network. You might do it informally, where you'll go, let's all meet and have lunch, and have a peer lunch every now and again as well. Just support each other. So some of the recommendations that we have, you can put in here exactly what you would want that to be like for yourself. And that can be completely different. for everybody. So in that space. So just have a central goal. And then, you know, alternative funding might be you could utilize someone else's funding rather than find the extra funds. It could be, well, we're funded to deliver that. You might meet with other stakeholders and widen it, what you thought it was. Now you might end up doing something that forms what we call an advisory group, where you may not be working on a project, but you're working collaboratively regularly as well. And it might be just that area around, say, housing, homelessness, or mental health, or AOD. Whereas with their networking, that could be very generalist and lots of groups come in. But there might be a group inside that where you can come together, and then you may build some great professional relationships and do that peer support as well. So consider what the current best practice is in that space, what's happening locally, and in your state, what are the trends, and then on a national level as well. And we talked about those peak bodies. How do we feed that information up? What you're discovering on the ground, those peak bodies absolutely need to know. You are the experts. You're the ones who are listening to the clients, and you're taking your clients' needs and you're advocating for them in a bigger picture. So just wrapping up this unit and the space that we've been in here, our key learnings are around collaborating in the community sector and networking and the different ways that we can do that, how we work with that as a worker individually to care for ourselves and make sure that we're staying up to date. And our professional development is current, how we work with our peers inside the same organisation, how we work with others in organisations to help our clients, and then how we are part of a bigger picture of the community sector as well, and feeding that information up. So I'll pause here because from here we're going to be jumping into the space around assessment. So I just want to keep it here in this space and take us over there just while we're wrapping up this part of our recording and our resource for each other. And I'd like to just take you over. What are you going to be doing? So welcome back, everybody. So part of your assessment work, it gives you a case study. I thought it would be best if I introduce the client because then it moves over into the project of collaborating and forming a group. But why do we come together? So let's start at the beginning and have a look at this particular hypothetical. So it's a support plan. This document sits inside your First Access portal, and I'll show you there that simulated workplace one that we were talking about. And it's pre-filled. It gives you a bit of information about the client. It's just going back to the beginning. Sorry, it's got the client's name, Lynn Lee. It also says, just for the sake of the assessment, that you see them on the 30th of October 2022, but the duration is the same date or close to in 2023. So that tells us that they're going to be with you, this client, for 12 months. Just helps you feel like we'll work on this a little bit more in the future. So who are the people in this? So you've got Lynn Lee, who is the client, yes. And you've got Min Lee, who is the mother, yes, also the client. And then you've got Tori Waller, the support worker, that is you. You will play the role of a community sector support worker in your assessment, your role play. That'll be the lens that you put over this. And you're the one who's going to be writing and filling in this individual support plan or community sector is full of acronyms, so an ISP, but every organisation calls these things different. There's about 5 different documents. It might be in a client evaluation. It could be a client referral form. It could be an incident report. When you go into the First Access site, all of that information is there, which is a simulated dashboard, because we work with all of these documents when we're in the sector. They're following our policies and our procedures. And when it says you must record and make sure you keep proper records, this is how we do it. We use the tools that we are provided in the workplace, and we follow those guidelines as well. So here's a summary on the client. So once you hear on reflection, to just include things like what you identify with this client, what their strengths and what are some concerns. That's your reflection area. Like, you know, for me, the priority of need would be this. I think that perhaps they're at risk. You need to put that in. You don't say they are at risk. You say potential, or I'd like to explore. We have nothing definitive in there because we don't know our clients well enough. And if they're sharing a story about something that's happened, it is the client stated, we weren't there, we don't know, unless we are witness to something. So our language when we keep our records is important. So I've highlighted a couple of things here. This, you're going to find this in your porthole, not with these highlighted areas. I highlighted them because I wanted to just explain that a little bit for you to help you better understand. So Lynn is a 16-year-old girl with a mild learning difficulty and a recent diagnosis of depression and anxiety. So what does that tell me? They're young. They're experiencing some mental health disorders. And then it might go on and say a little bit more. This is for us as a support worker, and the scenario, the hypothetical. So Lynn left school at 15, so 18 months ago, she disengaged from school. Okay, after having only attended on and off intermittently, means attendance was poor, so was disengaging over a period of time, you know, over the 2 years even before that. So okay, so she left at 15, 2 years back. So pretty much from 13 and now they're 16. This has been a real struggle area for this young person, and the genders identified. So Lynn felt this, so it wasn't Lynn wasn't learning, it's Lynn felt she wasn't learning, and often lashed out at teachers who she felt were picking on her due to her learning difficulties. So that's not a statement of fact, but the client or our information is that's how she felt. That's where our support work comes in. So if she's feeling anxious and depressed around that, that has been a recent diagnosis by an external party, a clinician or likely a GP. So we know there may be some other supports there. So there was one moment where she got suspended because her behaviour coming from that frustration acted out. So rather than the space we look at as a support worker in the community sector is we don't look at the behaviour, we look at the underlying areas of concern. It could be challenging, but there's a concern there, and that's the work that we will do. That's why we're going to have a look at what kind of support will be helpful for Lynn Lee, and the expert on Lynn Lee, of course, is Lynn Lee. So we need to be able to connect and engage and establish that that trust so that we can do our meaningful work together. She's largely stayed at home, so, and has not engaged in any work or further education, lives with a mother in suburban Melbourne. So we've got a bit of a picture. Lynn has no physical health concerns. Okay, all right, so some learning needs, some frustration, the mainstream system hasn't been a good fit in the past, lives with a mother, and this is actually impacting her because she's disengaged from her peers and wasn't getting out of school the way the school she attended, the way she needed to meet her needs. So Lynn's unsure about her future plans. She's not, you're going to work on that with her, but she said she enjoys cooking and gardening and perhaps would like a job in that area. She helps her mum around the house and enjoys learning to cook. She also enjoys craft activities and is a talented artist. Okay, so we've got some stepping off points there for your assessment to be able to explore and, connect with Lynn and engage there on that level, that getting to know. So she's lost touch with most of her school friends, even though they tried to in the beginning. She really didn't feel perhaps that she had things in common as they were progressing. And she was embarrassed about having left school, and they eventually dropped off. Lynn advises that she is lonely, but she doesn't know what to do about that. Keep in mind, she's still only very young, 16. She has some learning variations and how she perceives and understands and processes things. And now she's feeling isolated from people her own age, though she does have some moments that she does enjoy. So that's Lynn's story. Then Lynn's mum, Mai, has lived in Australia for 25 years. Her husband died when Lynn was 8. So sole parent, so there is still a lot of attachment and safety and around a mum as well. But so she's worked at a lot of more casual, like cleaning and kitchen hand jobs to provide for herself and Lynn. And May does not enjoy good health at the age of 52, and as she's concerned about what's going to happen for Lynn in the future. So she's accessing us at First Access. That's our organisation. And you, as this community support worker, went for the point of doing these assessments. So Mai has recently also been diagnosed in early stages of dementia. So I can see why Mai is concerned for Lynn and wanting to get those supports. And 12 months is the period of time you're going to do the individual support plan. So it's good to find out what Lynn's looking for, what Mai's looking for, and then identify what those goals are. And then you as a worker, what you can do, and then who you might need to network with and collaborate with to be able to provide some of those services that you explore with Lynn and Mai. So Mai, on behalf of Lynn Lee, because she's a minor, is giving consent for the support plan. So she would sign there. There's referrals and collaboration you need to send out. You'll need to get consent. So because Lynn is still a dependent for Mai, under Mai, it's Mai's consent and permission that you need in that space. Your name is Tori Waller, and you're the support worker and you work for First Access. And here you must sign. So the client will sign in that box and you'll put the date, and the date was given to us as a clue at the beginning. So you'll need to go back, circle back there. What date do I put in? We put in the date that it actually told us on the 30th of October 2022. So read to learn, listen to understand when you're in that role play. And this is the individual plan that you're developing for Lynn Lee. So you're going to explore what might be one goal, and you'll do that through your collaboration. Get some work experience. Lynn is not sure yet what sort of work experience. So you're going to explore what might be available in the local community and how you could refer over or find a program that she might be eligible to join, as well as working with you. So identify suitable job types and locations. When you go into the First Access portal, it actually says that you've got a career program there, but it might mean that there's another qualification. So she's not at school, but she's 16, and at 16 you can enroll in TAFE. However, there's just that anger outburst and that frustration, maybe a step before that would be some tutoring, or if we do refer Lindley over, you might say, oh, well, let's look at TAFE. You might need to get a student support officer in there as well, and you might need some counselling around those. What does Lynn have as a coping mechanism? We know that she had an outburst of anger. It got her suspended, but she didn't want to be there anyway because she just felt really disconnected. But what do we do when we place her back into something like that? We have to make sure that it's safe, knowing that. And then include Lee in that, the support as well. The learning disability that may actually be the trigger for where that frustration has come from. So you might help prepare a resume, a CV, curriculum vitae, and provide assistance with applications as well. So all of this is going to come out in your role play, and you'll talk to her about those first two goals. You'll discuss those goals around that. So socialising, what is out in the community, maybe there's something there that mum could be involved in as well, and it could be part of something in their community. So you discuss the goals in your role play, and you collaborate and identify 3 goals together. That'll include the referrals and refer them with consent, and may also be getting some referrals. They're both your clients in this space. Some might be just for Lindley, but some might be for May as well. Some could be bringing together. So have a think about where you would like to take this in your role play. So goal number 2 is socialising. And then goal number 3 is find ways to manage that anger being the behaviour, but the underlying cause, that root cause around that, and finding a different coping mechanism instead of an outburst. What's another strategy that could be applied, or could we get to the bottom of what that is? Again, May Lee will sign off on the final plan. This is great. This is what we're all going to do on that date, and that will be how you're filling that document, which is terrific. So that's our resource there. Okay. So this is in your learner portal, but you're going to get instructions on how to do the assessments. I wanted to just give you a preview of this. So here's your unit, CHCPRP001. And this is task 3 of 4 tasks to do for this unit. This is the project that you're working on. And I wanted to show you this page here. So this is your simulated workplace environment, your dashboard, where policies and procedures and all of the different services that First Access, it's their website. Jump in there and have a look at what's available. And then also, once you click in there, it'll take you into the staff login page. And here is your username. Keep this. This is going to be something that you use throughout all your studies. This is your dashboard. This is your simulated workplace, and you are that simulated staff member. And then your password is Hader 123456. So that's a place that you will go to. Here it tells you that the first email, so there's an email for you to have a look at and read. So read the scenario below. And then the 2 emails that follow that. So there's more information in a portal. I just want to bring this one to life for you. You're going to write an email and create your own based on the information. So you're required to make contact by email to Mary and ensure that all of John's points are addressed. So John sends you, John is in charge of all the service workers. So the first email is from a high up supervisor manager. And the second email is from Mary, who works at the community service organisation, one of them that you identified that you're going to refer over. So you're required to make contact by email to Mary and make sure that all of John's points have been addressed. John's saying, here is this young person, and here are the matters that we want to be able to provide services to. The referral has come to us, and then now we're going to look after that client, and we may have to do some extra referrals out for our wraparound support. When you go into First Access, if you do a search, the email template is in that dashboard, that website for First Access, and that's its code CG, and it's T1 email template. And we use the approved documents for the organisation, which we spoke about earlier, and the scenario. So this one actually takes it where it's 6 weeks after you've developed the plan, you've got the community organisations together, and it's outlined in task 2. How are you all going to come together and support Lynn Lee, or the agencies that you decided to bring in, and meet her highest priority goal? So that'll be what you decide with Lynn Lee and yourself. So Lynn Lee might have as her priority would be to work in hospitality, and somewhere she could do like get work, or that would be her highest priority. Your highest priority might be about managing the anger so that she can reach those goals. So you might be bringing in some counsellors. It might be someone from First Access, and it might be another service provider that's coming in, and you're all going to work and collaborate together. So you can still collaborate with people inside your organisation, because it could be a different department and a different service. So in this task, with the representative, you're going to be coming up with the discussion around it. So this is your email from John Ford, head of all the care services at First Access. Here is the date, and it's 6 weeks after the 30th of October, where you've done your plan, you've spoken to and you've spoken to Lynn, and now you've got this happening here. So it's meeting with the organisational representatives. That's the subject. This is how we write out an email. And you're going to do one as well. You're going to send it to Mary. Look at how it's laid out. That's an important point. And you need to take these points from his email and make sure that you reach those goals, but you're going to make sure that it's around what Lynn and you discussed and what Mai said might have thought would be really helpful. You're going to weave those in. Please let me know if you have any questions. So signed off by John, John's role, head of care, First Access at head office, the address, all the contact, a phone number. So if you're sending an email and say, you can call or email me, make sure you've got that information there in the bottom, rather than just expect them to hit reply. It's a formal document. It can be drawn upon for a legal purpose at some stage. So it's important we get that right. And then to you, and sending this out to Mary. And then I'm keen to learn about First Access and its services. So that comes from Mary. You're going to have to take all that information and communicate over to Mary on your email template. And then what you'll see in your portal will be, you'll save that email, and you will upload it, and it will go there, and then it will give you a save once it's actually got it captured. And then if you need to, you can add extra information there as well. If you just wanted to uncover and put a little bit more in there, that you say, oh, while I was doing this, I thought about that. Just paint a picture, tell a story, so we can read it, or we can reflect on that and listen to what it is that you're trying to say in that space. That's really helpful there as well. I'll stop sharing and we'll pause here for a moment. Okay, I've just popped you over to the other part, the role play, the practitioner skills around task 2. So there's 4 tasks in your assessment work here. This one here, let's just do an overview and I'll share that for you. So the purpose behind this assessment, which is both your written, or we talked about the email, your other written is the individual support plan for Lynn Lee, and May is part of that as well, knowing the story behind it. So in the assessment, it's a simulated community service facility. So that's when we set the scene in our background. Now, if you can't, then you blur it. And when you come in and record yourself, then you do that and describe the room. Now, you can do this with an assessor, a trainer and assessor. You just book in for that. Or you can also do that and bring somebody else in to play that role, and your trainer and assessor can sit there as well. So please go to our team for that, our learner support officers, who we let you know how to contact them in our induction for you. So here it actually takes you again to the First Access dashboard and site, the website, and again, your username and login, it stays the same the whole way, your passcode. But here are the instructions, and what you need to get from that website or your simulated workplace is, in part A, you have to identify how First Access and Lynn Lee's needs may be met through collaborative practice and networking with relevant services. You need to demonstrate that for us. And then part B in this, so there's 3 parts to this role play. You must contact a service representative, someone that you've identified in the plan when you were doing their support plan with Lynn Lee, and initiate a collaborative relationship. So that you might start with a phone call and a referral form over, just starting to get that relationship going with them so that you can collaborate and work for the benefit of Lynn Lee. And then part C, you must meet with the organisation representatives in part B. So that means you're going to come together as a group. And we spoke about that in our underpinning knowledge, the key learnings from the slides. And then that knowledge gets transferred over into your assessment work, your written and your practical skills. So you're going to be simulating that you're the worker and you're talking to Lynn Lee and developing and creating a plan, which you will do with Lynn Lee. So the resources you need are the individual support plan. So that's your supporting documents. It's been partly filled, so you know how to have that role play conversation and come up with the plan, where you're going from there. The email template also, that was in your portal. Network and partnering policy and procedure. Now you'll need to go in, how will I network? How will I manage inside the scope of my role? That'll be part of your written, and then we're going to observe you do that as well. And then the privacy and confidentiality procedure, you're going to state that when you first meet. You don't have to think about, how will I do that? What should I say? It's actually in the policies and procedures. We've guided you. You need to go in there and learn about those, and then practice your role play before you record your role play and book in that role play to be able to do that with an assessor. And then you will upload the role play as part of your evidence in your assessment to be able to complete this unit of competency. So you'll need, if you're being assessed online, you'll need access to a computer, a device where we can talk to each other, book in as a Zoom meeting, working internet, and then some kind of video conferencing like WebEx to record the role play. Or if you book in with an assessor, we do that on Zoom. We capture it in cloud and we send that back out to you. Some students, though, are very good at being able to do that And if you've got that platform, and you can also ask our learner support officers for some extra resources on how to do that. And then we'll have another unit around before you get into that space of role plays. We've got some extra resources that we can help you with there. But tap into your learner support officers and be guided. This is a recording, but we have a very blended learner community of quite a lot of learners all around Australia. We've even got some overseas learners as well. So we're a small team in the training team, but we're part of a much larger group. And we have learner support officers who are available Monday to Friday through to after hours as well to fit in with your needs. We have assessors that will work with you on a weekend if that's best time for you to do a role play, or at a night after work. So we've got a great support model around it for our community of learners as well. And so what we teach is also what we apply at HADA, so that you can see what that's like, that journey through that process that you may end up doing for your own clients in those wraparound supports as well. So that's our overall. The instructions in part A are around our emails, and we spoke through those, and you will do one. You will access the individual support plan, which I've shown you. That's all part of that as well, and how you're going to complete it. And you're going to complete that while you're being recorded, because you're building that with Lynn Lee in that role play, and someone will play Lynn Lee. And then your individual support plan. So access the following supporting documents to be able to make sure that you complete that as well. So let's jump into that space there. Make sure that I've got the correct unit for you. So all of our units we have in that space are here. So there's another role play, which is task 4 of 4. And let me bring that up for you. Okay. So an overview of 4 of 4. So that's the final task that you're doing in that assessment. Again, we're back in our first access. So you'll use this many times throughout your study, and that will get you into the portal. And reviewing the collaborative partnership, and here are the instructions. So you will have identified in your time with Lynn Lee, with First Access, 3 service providers in this relationship. First Access is one service provider, and then there'll be service provider number 1 and service provider number 2. So you'll need to, with Lynn Lee, work out who you would like together to be able to refer her over. It might be a community group that her mum, there might be a youth group there that they could all go along and socialise, and she will address one of those priority of needs where she was feeling really isolated. At First Access, you might look at the career planning and the counselling around the anger management. You could do that in-house. And then another one might be an educational institute, or it could be a community organisation that has like a community garden and a little cafe, and they take volunteers. Take it where you want it to go. It's your scenario. You think about what's available in your local area. It says that Lynn Lee lives in Melbourne, but you can research what's happening in your local area and apply that, because in role play land, everything is possible. It's a simulated workplace environment. But do some research. You might decide that in a Melbourne suburb that there is something, but you might be based elsewhere. So look about what's available and bring that rich story in, and those options for Lynn Lee. And then, of course, these are going to be the service providers that you bring in and form that collaborative team, and you'll do that through your networking. So the second part that you need to do is identify at least 2 opportunities for improvement in your own professional network. And your supervisor is going to want to hear how this is going. We work autonomously when we're out there, but we need to make sure that we're reporting up at all times. That's a requirement for every worker. So how could we improve our networks? You might be able to take that to John Ford and give feedback and say, this is what I've identified working in this space. There's a real gap with that sector of the community, that cultural group that May and Lynn identify with. And I believe that we could bring some of that knowledge into First Access by having them be guest speakers, or that we could go and do a tour, that we need to have a stronger link with that part of the community, because we have a need at First Access to know more about that. And we may have other clients that also could benefit there. And then it might also be some professional development that they could come in and work with the team. Take that where you think your recommendations could be, what you think would be of value for the organisation to be able to strengthen the services, and then feed that information up to your line manager or supervisor. And then how the networks can be improved, what you think would be helpful. And then how are you going to maintain those networks and keep them strong? And at least one benefit to the clients by doing that. How will it be great for our clients, and how will it also be really good for our organisation to strengthen that area? That's what we're looking for there in both your written and your role play, your skills. Point 4 is identify at least 2 strengths and weaknesses that are in the collaborative partnership that you've set up between First Access and the other 3 community groups. So what's going well and what could be done differently, you'll need to identify that. And for the weaknesses I identified above, make your recommendations as well, what you'd like it to be. What are the resources? You're going to put all of that information into your line manager and in the email template as well. And here is the scenario for the role play. I won't read that out for you, but this is where we are 4 months later. And the progress is made. This information is available in your portal, and then you're going to send the email out as well. And then in part 3, the final part, the instructions. So you've got task 1, part A, and task 1 in part A, and part B, and the second task there. So we're up to item 2 of these 2 parts in this. I'll slow that down a little for you. So there's a part A in this one, in task 4 of 4, and there's a part B, and there's tasks and instructions. Here it's, if you click on that link when it's time for you to do that, it actually gives you the role play instructions, exactly what you've got to be able to do with the knowledge that you've got from your written and your studies from your learner's guide and how you've explored that. So you'll do a scenario with the service provider you initially met with in task 2. And the service provider you emailed as well will be around that. And you've called the meeting to review that collaborative partnership. So we're 4 months in and it's been sort of going well, but we've identified in the review there's some gaps that hasn't quite flowed. And then that is when I was talking about, let's come into this space and see if we can support each other in a collaborative way. And then how are you going to approach that? We want to hear what your strategies are based on the learnings that we have covered with you in this assessment. So just wrapping up our underpinning knowledge, our key learnings from our PowerPoint slides. I've shared with you some of the written components around the assessment and what would be required. And now you have your recording and you'll have your resources and your induction also to show you how you can get supported in that space while you're doing your studying, and get access to our learner support officers as well. So I will wrap up the end of it. This is the end of your unit for CHCPRP001, and there are 4 assessment tasks with 2 separate role plays and some written work that you'll be doing as part of this assessment.